Randall Hughes with GodGlorified.com, and we are commenting today on our Bible reading from mostly the book of Joshua with some intermingling of Judges and Chronicles. And in it is continuing with the conquest, and one of the great portions of the book of Judges, or Joshua, and is when Caleb says, "Give me my mountain," but we're not there just yet. But it's going through some of the conquest, and it's going through here in the chapter 12 of Joshua. It goes through a list of kings that's very significant to me. This is a very significant list because of the wording in this chapter. In this 12th chapter, verses 9 through 24, it uses the one multiple times, apparently 31 times according to the tally at the end of the chapter. And let me see if I can give you the word I'm looking for that is used here. This is the word echad that's used for one in the Hebrew. And it is a uniplural word, much like our word one. We can speak of one nation under God, and we know that's speaking of the nation of the United States. We can speak of one state. We can speak of one city. We can speak of one person. And so it can have multiple applications. And so it's a word that Trinitarians have tried to play on and tried to say that, for instance, it was one cluster of grapes that was carried out by the spies earlier. And they say that should have, and it uses the word echad. And they try to say that it could have or should have been yakid is the word that in the Hebrew frequently is translated as only. And yet it is not always meaning what they say it means. And so it's very important, and I think I may have made comment on this back in Genesis chapter 22. This is when God tests Abraham, and it says verse 22, verse 2, it says, "And he said, now take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee unto the land of Moriah, and offer him." And so the claim is that yakid is a more specific, narrower interpretation of one. And yet we know in Genesis 22 that Isaac was not truly, absolutely Abraham's only son. He was his only son of promise, yes, but he had Ishmael. And so it was not an absolute only. And so it does not really support, to me, the argument that's being made. Furthermore, there's multiple times the word echad is used to mean one. And I'm not saying it is Hebraically as correct. It's got more of a throat clearing sound at the end. Echad. It almost like you're clearing your throat. And I probably could never speak Hebrew, but it has that texture, whatever sound to it. But here echad is used 31 times, and it adds them up at the end of it in verse 24 to say it was 31 kings. And so to try to say that it never means one is clearly not applicable. It's echad is the number of ribs that God removed from Adam. And so Brother Saban said, if you try to take the Trinitarian interpretation, Adam could have lost a whole side in that transaction rather than just one rib. And so it doesn't hold water. And so to me, this is a very critical passage that demonstrates in the Old Testament time, very close to the writing of Moses, when Moses would have written Deuteronomy 6:4, not that many years later. I believe Deuteronomy 6:4 would have been around 1422 still, somewhere in that time frame. Let me see, 1423 probably is when that would have been written. If I can hit that. Yes, 1423. So we're now in 14:16. So the meaning hasn't changed that significantly, even though it is a different author. It's Joshua rather than Moses. I believe that it doesn't hold water to try to say, use the Yakid versus Ikad argument. At the end of the day, and then they try to use the uniplural form of Elohim, which is the word God. And so this is basically around Deuteronomy 6:4. And here is a demonstration of that. And so just to reiterate for you, if I may have said it back on the date that we read from Deuteronomy 6:4, I don't recall if I did or not, actually. But Deuteronomy 6:4, Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. Now, I use the divine name. I'm not using the substitute. Adonai is typically how a Jew would say it, because they don't want to use the name. I don't believe in the prohibition of using the name. It is something that occurred in the intertestamental period, same time that the Apocrypha books were being written, is when sometime around 180 BC, sometime after Malachi wrote. And if you read Malachi, he uses the name and puts it on the lips of people speaking the name with no condemnation on them speaking it. And so I don't believe that that is a valid prohibition. I believe it was something that God allowed. Obviously, he could have prevented it. He could have, but yet it happened. So anyway, when you look at the sentence, you have to understand it's the context of the sentence. It makes the structure to me. Let me give this as an example, because you use a uniplural word, Elohim, with the word one. So what does that mean? It says, listen, Israel, God, Yahweh is God, Yahweh is one, is how the English most rough, whatever application would be. And so it would be like me saying, Rudolph is a reindeer. Rudolph is one. Well, reindeer is a uniplural form. But you know, because of the word one, that we're speaking of one reindeer. And so it's the same. It does not prove what Trinitarians want to make it prove. And I don't mean to be making belittling or make whatever fun of in any way, shape, or form, but that's some of the application of the way that comes across to me. And so God, it's not just saying God is one. It's saying Yahweh is God and Yahweh is one. And so to me, it's even deeper than just, it's saying, okay, listen, Israel, you know who your God is. You know him by name, and he is one. Yahweh is one God. And so very, very emphatic, very clear. And so love the part where Joshua gave to Caleb. And here in chapter 14 is where that's probably so most emphatic. And I'm going to hurry here to make this point and then try to wrap up. God give us a heart. Verse 7 says, 40 years ago, I was Moses' servant. He sent me Kadesh Barnea to spy the land, and I brought him word again, as it was in my heart. God, let your word be in my heart in such a way that I will always speak truth and speak what you want me to say, even in the sight of impossible circumstances and odds, no matter how difficult the enemy may be that I'm facing, that my faith in you would supersede anything that seems to be a reality of earth and nature, that your power can overtake. You are a supernatural, wonder-working God, miracle-working God. Help me never to lose faith that you have more miracles where the others have come from. I want to always believe in you to produce more miracles. And so God gave him his mountain that he had promised him 45 years before. And so just an awesome thing of our God fulfilling promises. And it may not happen overnight. It may not happen the way we think it should. And then we also see how his daughter said, what you've given is not enough. I really want some springs. And so he gave her the springs. And so make sure you get everything that God can give to you is another application that I would see here. don't just be content. There's times I hope, and this can come across wrong, because we need to be living a life of contentment with what God has provided for us in some regards. And yet there's some blessings and things that I could say, God, it's not that you owe me anything. It's not that you owe me one more thing. But God, you've been so good, and I believe that you can do this. And so if you would, I'm going to ask. And that's what I see happen here. And I want to have a heart that it's almost like the blind man that got Jesus healed and touched, and he says, what do you see? And he says, well, I see men as trees walking. And Jesus touched him again. I want to receive everything God has for me is the end of the story. And I pray that it's not for selfish motivation. I pray that it's for elevating the kingdom and elevating his name, so that his word goes forth in a powerful way, and that lives are changed and transformed into his likeness and to be more like him. And so I just pray that this is a blessing to you in Jesus' great name.